Los Angeles, California, 1871. In less than 4 hours, 10% of the Chinese population of the city would be brutally murdered. And as if that night wasn't horrifying enough, in the years that followed, the events would largely be forgotten. It's the history of murder, and I'm your host, Clare O'Donoghue. On October 24th, 1871, about 500 white and Latino Los Angeles residents hunted down and killed any Chinese man or boy they could find. And afterward, they celebrated in a bar. According to David Louie, a Los Angeles historian and fourth-generation Chinese American, though there was clearly animosity toward them, the Chinese population wasn't even very large.
I think in 1830, there were like 2 or 3. And then by 1850, which is when the gold rush was going on, a lot of Chinese came to the United States. In California, there may have been a couple of thousand, but the following year, there were as many as 20,000 that had come to California. And then by the 1870s, gold rush was over, Civil War was over, construction of the Transcontinental Railroad was done, and the Chinese population here in Los Angeles was all of about 180 folks.
And a third were concentrated in one place.
60 of them lived in the El Pueblo area. Another 60 lived with their employers. They worked as servants and housekeepers, landscapers, or farmers, and the other 60 were spread out over the entire city. So one of the primary locations, concentrations right here, the El Pueblo area. The area had been in the 1840s, 1850s, up through the 1860s, the high-end area to live. This was a great area to live. But over the next decade, going into the 1870s, it had become sort of the armpit of Los Angeles. And so what is now called Los Angeles Street was previously called Calle del Negros, Street of the Colored People. And not necessarily African American, but rather dark-skinned people. So those could include Mexicans, Africans, and Chinese. It was really the slum area of Los Angeles where the very poor would live.
Historian James Miller Gwynn wrote in 1896 that it was, quote, the wickedest street on earth. On either side, it was lined with saloons, gambling hells, dance houses, and disreputable dives. Gambling hells is not a misspeak. It's what Gwynn actually wrote. The Chinese immigrants didn't mingle with the rest of the population for reasons on both sides.
They didn't speak the language, looked different, smelled different, ate different types of food, but were here because they wanted to work, earn money. And for most of them, they wanted to take that money and send it back to China and at some point return to China. So they were very, very motivated to whatever work was available, they were willing to do.
Even though most of the new arrivals didn't assimilate with the general population, in part because they didn't want to and in part because they weren't welcome to, they did form a community.
The primary group of Chinese came from southern China, Canton area of China. And coming over, they formed their own smaller, I look at them as family associations. They were sometimes called companies, but they were based on the specific area that you came from, a very small local area. And they served it was a mutual benefit type of situation. The ones that arrived here that were able to establish had jobs. For the new arrivals, you needed to have somebody to give you a helping hand, whether it was helping you find a job. I suspect none of them spoke English. So find a job, maybe to borrow money, find a place to live, people to hang out with that spoke your language, believed in the same kind of God that you believed in, ate the same kind of food that you ate. That was the benefit of the associations. Chinese Benevolent Association.
The associations had another role that would become essential in what happened later.
If you had a dispute with somebody, you could go to the association and have resolve that or answer those questions.
With the groups living very separate lives, there was little resentment of the residents of El Pueblo. That changed.
The economy changed. And again, not only did the Civil War ending, Transcontinental Railroad ending, the gold rush ending, other folks became unemployed. And now the economics in the 1860s, going into the 1870s, the mood changed. The Chinese were now not only different, but now appeared to be a threat to employment. So some of the newspapers highlighted that, wrote articles about threats from the barbarians, the heathens among us. That's who the Chinese were described as. There was a sort of resentment that started to grow.
On July 10th, 1870, the Los Angeles Daily Star published an article on a debate in the U.S. Senate about Chinese immigration. It reported that Oregon Senator George Henry Williams said that, quote, the Declaration of Independence did not mean that heathens and cannibals were to be allowed equal political rights under the law, unquote.
The Chinese were being victims of sometimes attacks, ridicule, and legislation that would not allow them to come in. California had its Anti-Coolie Act, which wanted to restrict the Chinese who were referred to as coolies.
The act, passed in 1862, was to appease white laborers who were concerned about Chinese immigration. It imposed a monthly $3 tax, about $100 today, on any Chinese who wished to work in the state of California. In 1870, a U.S. law prevented anyone of Chinese birth from becoming a naturalized citizen.
That combination of economic pressure and the depiction of the Chinese as being now different, now threatening, and the kind of work that was being done put an edge to the relationship between the citizens, specifically Los Angeles, and the Chinese community.
Los Angeles was a frontier town. By 1870, the population was just over 5,700 people. It might have been small, but it had attitude. The first public building was a jail. According to Horace Bell, a writer and founding member of the 19th century militia group, the LA Rangers, the city was a dangerous place.
There were more desperados in Los Angeles than any other place on the Pacific coast.
The murder rate was 12.4 per thousand in the 1850s. That's the highest murder rate of any time in U.S. history. The current murder rate in Los Angeles is about 0.08 per thousand. To combat crime, Los Angeles leaders created a vigilante committee, basically an organized mob, who would determine what justice was and who would live or die. There wasn't much that could stop them. The police department had only been formed in 1870, and there were only 6 officers. One of the jobs those 6 officers had was to patrol Chinatown. Not an easy job most days, but it got particularly difficult in October of 1871. And it started with an argument over a Chinese woman.
The gender mix was heavily male. So the few women that came, and the percentage of women versus men was maybe 5 to 10%. And many of the women were brought in to be wives or to work in the brothels as prostitutes. One family association had a woman that was supposed to be the bride-to-be for one of the members of that association, and another family association allegedly kidnapped that woman and married her to one of their members.
The kidnapper was a member of the association led by Hing, a local businessman. It was not a love match. It's likely the woman, Yat Ho, did not know the man who kidnapped her, nor the man she was supposed to marry. She was caught in a power play between 2 associations. Some members of the First Families Association came down from San Francisco to get her back.
They arrived in San Pedro, the harbor, and they came up to El Pueblo. They arrived at about 5:30 in the afternoon. It was getting dark, and members ran into each other. And a dispute started. Shots were fired between the 2 family associations. And then the local authorities responded. Local authorities being 6 police officers, the city of Los Angeles. And I think two of them were on duty at the time, heard the shots.
The officers told the men to stop, but the shooters ran into the Carnal building. There was crossfire between the men and the officers, and one of the police officers, Jesus Bilderan, was wounded in the shoulder. A local bartender named Robert Thompson decided to help the officer. Another man, Adolfo Salas, shouted at Thompson as the bartender approached the Carnal building.
"Don't go there or they'll shoot you."
Robert Thompson went to the front door and stood in the doorway and then fired into the building. Police officer tried to stop him, but he felt that he knew what was right. And standing there in the doorway, I suspect was a perfect silhouette. They hit him.
He fell back and said, "I've been killed."
The people around said, "Hey, the Chinese are killing the whites."
There was already chaos on the streets because of the gunfire, and it's likely that most people didn't even know that Thompson had been shot. But there was something about the gunfire and the wounding of Officer Bilderan that released a barely contained hatred of the Chinese.
Police officers were trying to seal off the area, and they had to decide whether to go in and try to extradite the bad guys or just try to hold it until the morning, because now it was 6:30, 7 o'clock, and they decided to try to just hold the building until the morning. And the crowd grew, got to a max of about 500, which is almost 10% of the population of Los Angeles now in the area surrounding the building. And they were demanding vigilante justice to bring death to the folks, to hang them, to drag them out of there. They shot into the building. By this time, the culprits actually had escaped.
There were as many as 20 men still in the building, merchants who worked there, who had nothing to do with the shootout or Thompson's serious wound. They were trapped.
The vigilantes, they climbed up on top of the building, tore holes in the roof, shot into the building, tried to burn them out. Some of the folks in the building tried to escape. There was no escape. You try to exit a building surrounded by 500 people. There's not a good chance you're going to get away.
One man, Wing, did attempt an escape, but he was caught by several of the vigilantes. The police asked them to take the man to jail.
And they said, sure, and started taking him to sit in jail.
But instead of the jail, they began heading in the other direction, toward a makeshift gallows at the gate at Tomlinson's Corral. 2 officers stopped them before they could get too far, but by now the crowd was getting bigger around Wing and his captors. According to Officer Emil Harris, the men shouted, "Hang him! Shoot him!" Someone grabbed Harris and pinned his arms while someone else took the unfortunate Wing. When the crowd moved on and Harris was released, he did not go after the group. He felt he could do little to help, so he went back toward the main commotion and left Wing to his fate. The men's attempt to lynch Wing did not go smoothly. One rope they got at a nearby store broke. Another one didn't do the job. Eventually, somebody jumped on his shoulders and broke his neck. They left the body there and went back to join the rest of the mob outside the Carnal building.
Vigilantes finally overcame the police and entered the building and basically murdered or lynched the remaining folks that they could capture, not only in the building, but also in the surrounding area, the Chinese community.
One space at the Carnal building was the office and home of Dr. Jean Tong. Just before 9 p.m., the crowd broke into his home, grabbed the doctor, his wife, and another man in the house. Dr. Tong, who spoke fluent English, tried to reason with the crowd.
He had accumulated some money, so he begged for his life. He offered them all of his money. They took his ring, they took off his finger. They ransacked his offices, stole his money. And then at the end, simply put a pistol in his mouth.
All around, Chinese men were grabbed, dragged to Tomlinson's Corral, and hung. An angry mob set upon 3 men who were on their way home from work. One of them was a teenager who had just arrived from China. They hadn't been in the neighborhood when the gunshots went off. They didn't have any idea what was going on. It didn't matter. Those in the mob that weren't involved in the lynchings did their own damage. They looted the shops, taking gold coins, cash, merchandise, anything they could lift. It's estimated that rioters stole somewhere between $14,000 and $30,000 worth of money and merchandise, or between $400,000 and $800,000 in today's money. Not every white man in that neighborhood that night was with the mob. Some tried to stop the violence. One man, a lawyer named Henry Hazard, followed the crowd, even jumping on a wagon to plead with them to release their captives. Instead, the mob threatened to kill him. He then saw 3 men walking a Chinese hostage toward the gallows. He pulled at one of the men and begged him to stop.
Would you take that man to be hanged? You would be taking that man to be murdered. You will not hang your Chinaman.
This time it worked. The men let their hostage go. In other places, white and Latino shopkeepers hid Chinese immigrants in back rooms. Some lives were saved as a result, but they couldn't save everyone.
60 or so Chinese that were right in the area of El Pueblo. 18 of them were murdered. I think 15 of them were lynched and 3 of them were shot. It was truly a public demonstration of power and hate and ignorance.
By 9:20, less than 4 hours after it began, it was over. 25 men had been deputized to keep order, but by then they didn't really need to do much. The surviving Chinese immigrants had either hid or fled, and their tormentors, they went to a bar.
All the Chinese had been dealt with, and the party was on. Many of the folks who were involved went to the local saloons and bars and combined with a little alcohol and the excitement of when it occurred. Many of them started to brag about what they had done. One guy said, I killed 5 Chinese. I got 3. We dispatched barbarians to their grave.
During the night, Wing, the first man lynched, had been cut down and buried. The others stayed on the gallows until the police cut the bodies down. The next morning, there were 2 very different narratives of the events. On one hand was the somber reality of the 18 victims. They were 10% of the Chinese population of the city. All of them tortured and killed. Only one of them had been involved in the original gunfight. On the other hand, was how the events were portrayed in the larger Los Angeles.
Los Angeles News, they described the incident as a glorious night, relieving the city of the undesirables, the aliens among us.
But in the days that followed, other papers in Los Angeles and elsewhere called it the Night of Horrors.
It was international news. New York papers just said this was an example of the primitive city of Los Angeles. And it may have been the low point or the turning point for Los Angeles to move away from its vigilante, wild, wild west, murder capital of the United States image.
There was a quick burial the next day after a coroner's inquest. They were buried in the city's cemetery with the intention that their bodies would eventually be shipped back to China for their final resting place.
In the Chinese tradition, after the bodies had decomposed, transported the bones of the victims back to China so that they could return to their home.
The mourners who gathered were in shock, angry, and terrified. They were united in their grief, but they ignored one grave, the one dead man who had been involved in the original gun battle. A reporter noted their reaction.
None of the Chinese would have anything to do with him. Even after he was interred, they declined to offer to his departed spirit that tribute which is customary for them to pay.
Thanks to the bragging in the bar after the lynchings, there were witnesses who could name the men that admitted to their involvement.
There were, I think, approximately 25 individuals that had been identified that participated in the massacre, and they were charged.
The press said that only lowlifes had participated in the attacks, but that wasn't quite an accurate description. Many of the men were middle-class business owners or workers. Most had no criminal records. One witness, Joseph Mesmer, testified.
Some of our own average citizens took part, mingling with the scum and the riffraff from the camps and stables.
Among the rioters identified was Adolfo Salas, who had warned Robert Thompson from getting involved. Unlike the average citizens, Salas had previously been convicted of manslaughter. He was one of 10 men who stood trial for his involvement in the massacre. The other 15 that had been initially indicted were not brought to trial. There were multiple trials, and the prosecution sought witnesses to testify. But that wasn't an easy task. Many of the white and Latino witnesses did not want to come forward. Some were concerned about their safety, and others were embarrassed they hadn't done anything to stop the mayhem. No Chinese were called to the stand.
Part of the challenge was that the laws in the state of California at that time actually prevented a Chinese person from testifying against a white person.
Because the Chinese witnesses to the events were not allowed to testify, we have no first-hand records of what they experienced, and very few reporters sought out the mostly non-English speaking residents. Hing, the leader of the association that kidnapped the woman, talked to a reporter about the effects of the massacre on his community.
A good many Chinamen are skilled. I think many good Chinamen will leave Los Angeles and not come back.
The witnesses who did take the stand did their best to tell what they knew, but under cross-examination, they acknowledged the streets had been dark. The mob was so large and fast that it was impossible to identify who did what. And the words they heard in the bars afterwards? Not only were the men who spoke those words drunk, but so were most of the witnesses. In the end, there were 8 convictions, all for manslaughter, and the sentences ranged from 3 to 6 years. Adolfo Salas was not among them. He had been acquitted. The 8 men who were convicted served less than a year in prison. Their convictions were each overturned. Robert Thompson, the bartender who was shot at the Carnal building, died of his injuries during the night of the massacre. Some stories later painted him as a hero asked by the police to help. Others were less flattering, suggesting that he had robbed a store run by a Chinese immigrant. Neither depiction seems likely. There was also a trial for his murder. Sam Yen, a member of the association that had sent men from San Francisco, was put on trial for that. Hing, the leader of the other association, talked to a reporter about what he thought about it.
The Chinamen think there was a very bad thing to kill the officers, and the guilty parties should have been punished.
Not that it mattered. The trial ended in an acquittal. No one saw who shot Robert Thompson, and the general agreement was 18 Chinese men had already been killed, in part because of it. Hing had been charged with inciting a riot, but that didn't go anywhere either. Prosecutors never brought a case against him. Perhaps the one group held responsible was the Vigilante Committee. While no one accused the committee of being directly involved with the riot, newspapers published articles saying that they had set a tone that led the rioters to believe that they could kill 18 men without trial or evidence or consequence. There's no clear answer on what happened to Yat Ho, the woman whose kidnapping started it all. Some say that her fiancé and his association paid to get her back, and she was returned to China. Others say she was sent to a brothel. We just don't know. A year after the massacre, there was a remembrance of the victims in El Pueblo.
The living Chinese here in Los Angeles recognize their dead and the anniversary, not by some violent protests against the city, but celebration of the life of the people who had to go to, and trying to move forward with a positive attitude about continuing their efforts to work and reside at peace in the city of Los Angeles.
The street, Calle de los Negros, was renamed Los Angeles Street in 1887. The owner of Tomlinson's Corral tore down the gate that had been used to lynch so many men. Both the white and Chinese populations of Los Angeles put that night behind them. but discrimination against the Chinese did not end. The Chinese Exclusion Act passed into law in 1882. It was the first federal legislation that restricted immigration based on race.
The 1882 Exclusion Act said no more Chinese, period. And that was only changed, I think, during World War II, 1943 or so, that the Exclusion Act was lifted. But in actual practical purposes, from 1943 until 1962, they only averaged 150 Chinese immigrants over that time per year. And now it expanded. I think they have as many as 15,000, 20,000 Chinese being immigrated. And now our community here in Los Angeles, Southern California, is several hundred thousand Chinese.
David Louie and the Chinese American Museum of Los Angeles, among others, realized that what happened was in danger of being completely forgotten.
It diminished year by year. And then it became sort of buried history from the Chinese side. I think it was something that was not pleasant to remember. It was something to be, I don't know, ashamed is the correct word, but it was nothing to be proud of. And to those individuals, they did not want to belabor when it occurred. It really did not pass on. And by the time the next second, third generation of Chinese, by my generation, it was simply lost.
But the impact of that night did not get lost.
That was the rock bottom for Los Angeles to try to step into the 21st century and become a real city. And that it did, and that it has done.
What do you think about this case? Please comment below. And if you liked this story, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like and notification buttons, and let us know if there are cases you'd like us to cover.